A tattooed gangster targets a disabled Vietnam veteran on a crowded city bus, ripping off the old soldier's military cap and stomping on it while his crew films for social media. The thug shoves the 70-year-old man with the prosthetic leg, calling him a baby killer as terrified passengers look away. But the quiet stranger in the hoodie rising from the back seat isn't just another rider. This is Mike Tyson himself. The gangster has no idea he just assaulted a war hero in front of a man whose fists once ruled the heavyweight division with pure devastation. While the bully threatens to put the old man out of his misery, the former champion steps forward. With that unmistakable voice, the veteran recognizes his savior and braces himself, knowing he's about to witness legendary justice. The gangster's crew keeps recording, thinking they're capturing another humiliation, but they're actually filming their leader's encounter with one of history's most feared fighters. What happens when you pick on a veteran in front of Iron Mike? Can the thug survive learning why some legends never lose their edge? What happened next would terrorize the gangster for the rest of his pathetic existence. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun painted Brooklyn in golden hues as Mike Tyson stood on his fire escape, a handful of seeds scattered across his weathered palm. His beloved pigeons cooed softly, their feathers catching the early light as they pecked at the offering. At 58, the former heavyweight champion of the world found peace in these quiet moments, a stark contrast to the roaring crowds and camera flashes that once defined his existence. "There you go, Muhammad," he whispered to a particularly bold gray pigeon, his distinctive lisp softening the words. "Take your time, champ." The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd named his birds after other fighters. These creatures had taught him patience in ways no trainer ever could. Where once his hands had been instruments of controlled violence, now they offered gentle sustenance to beings that asked for nothing more than care and consistency. His modest apartment reflected this transformation. Boxing memorabilia sat alongside books about pigeon racing and philosophy. The morning routine never varied. Coffee at 6:15, feeding the birds at 6:30, then preparation for whatever the day demanded. Today meant volunteering at the Brownsville Youth Center, working with kids who reminded him of his own turbulent youth. The familiar buzz of his phone interrupted his meditation. Jerome Washington's name appeared on the screen, along with a simple message. "Ready for today's session? The kids are excited to see you." Tyson smiled, pocketing the device. These weekly visits had become the anchor of his rebuilt life. No cameras, no interviews, just him and a group of teenagers who needed to understand that strength without discipline was just destruction waiting to happen. Some days he taught them basic boxing moves. Other days, he simply listened to their stories, remembering when he'd been just as angry, just as lost that he gathered the empty seed container and stepped back inside, his apartment suddenly feeling smaller after the open air of the fire escape. The walls held photos from his professional career, but they seemed like artifacts from another man's life. The Mike Tyson who terrorized heavyweight divisions existed in those frames, but the man preparing for his morning commute had learned something infinitely more valuable than how to throw a devastating uppercut. Pulling on a simple gray hoodie and worn jeans, he caught his reflection in the hallway mirror. The facial tattoo that had once been a symbol of rebellion now seemed like ancient history. His body still carried the muscle memory of countless training sessions, but his eyes held something that had been absent during his championship years: genuine peace. The baseball cap came next, pulled low to avoid recognition. Fame had been both a blessing and a curse, but these days he preferred anonymity. Let people remember Iron Mike from the highlight reels. The man boarding Brooklyn public transportation was someone else entirely, someone who'd learned that true victory came from lifting others up, not knocking them down. MetroCard in hand, he stepped into the hallway and locked his door. The pigeons would be waiting when he returned, just as the kids at the youth center waited for him now. Somewhere in the distance, a bus engine rumbled to life, carrying him toward whatever lessons the day might offer. The B46 bus wheezed to a stop at Fulton Street, its doors opening with a mechanical sigh that seemed to echo the morning fatigue of Brooklyn's working class. Mike Tyson climbed aboard, dropping his MetroCard into the scanner and nodding respectfully to Rico Martinez, the bus driver whose weathered hands gripped the wheel with decades of experience. Morning, Tyson murmured, his voice kept deliberately low as he made his way toward the back of the crowded vehicle. The bus was a rolling portrait of his old neighborhood's resilience. A young nurse in scrubs dozed against the window, her 12-hour shift at Brooklyn Methodist finally over. Construction workers discussed overtime opportunities, their hard hats balanced on their laps like crowns of honest labor. Near the front, Maria Gonzalez struggled with her stroller, her 2-year-old daughter reaching curious fingers toward other passengers while grocery bags threatened to spill from her arms. Without drawing attention to himself, Tyson rose from his seat and approached. "Let me help you with that," he offered, his massive hands gently steadying the bags while the young mother maneuvered her stroller into a more secure position. "Thank you," she smiled, not recognizing the face beneath the baseball cap but sensing the genuine kindness in his gesture. "People don't mention it," Tyson replied, already returning to his seat. "Beautiful little girl." An elderly Puerto Rican woman across the aisle watched the interaction with knowing eyes. Something about the stranger's voice, the careful way he moved, triggered a memory she couldn't quite place. Her husband had been a boxing fan, she remembered. All those Saturday nights watching fights on television, shouting at the screen in Spanish and English alike. Tyson settled back into his seat and opened his book, a detailed guide to pigeon racing that had been consuming his attention for weeks. The author described training methods that reminded him of his own discipline, the patience required to develop champions whether they had wings or wore boxing gloves. He found himself nodding along with passages about the importance of routine, the delicate balance between pushing forward and knowing when to rest. The bus lurched through traffic, collecting and depositing passengers at each stop. A group of teenagers boarded near Nostrand Avenue, their conversation peppered with slang that made Tyson smile despite himself. He'd been their age once, all rage and misdirected energy, before boxing had given his fury a purpose. Through the window, he watched the neighborhood change with each passing block. Gentrification crept through these streets like morning fog, transforming familiar landmarks into something unrecognizable. Old bodegas became artisanal coffee shops. Buildings that had housed 3 generations of families now sported signs advertising luxury condominiums. The elderly woman was still watching him, her eyes narrowed in concentration. Tyson felt her attention but kept his focus on the book, hoping to avoid the recognition that would inevitably follow. These quiet moments of anonymity had become precious to him, opportunities to observe the world without becoming its center of attention. The bus slowed for another stop, and Tyson glanced up to see 3 men boarding. Something in their swagger, the way they carried themselves like predators surveying prey, made his jaw tighten slightly. Vinny Torino led the group, his expensive street clothes and gold chains marking him as someone who believed intimidation was a form of currency. The atmosphere in the bus shifted perceptibly as the trio pushed through passengers without apology, their loud conversation cutting through the morning's relative peace like a blade through silk. Vinny Torino surveyed the bus like a shark sensing blood in the water, his cocaine-enhanced confidence radiating from every pore. Behind him, Marcus, Mac, DeLuca, and Joey Ricci flanked him with the practiced precision of men accustomed to violence. Their designer sneakers squeaked against the bus floor as they pushed past working passengers, treating the morning commuters like obstacles rather than human beings. "Look at all these beautiful people," Vinny announced loudly, his voice dripping with mock affection. "Working hard for their pennies, riding the bus like good little sheep." His crew laughed on cue, the sound harsh against the bus's mechanical hum. Other passengers instinctively looked away, recognizing the particular brand of danger that walked among them. The young mother with the stroller clutched her daughter closer. The construction workers suddenly found their phones fascinating. Even the elderly Puerto Rican woman turned toward the window, though her eyes kept darting back to the man in the hoodie reading his book. That Vinny's predatory scan stopped when it landed on Walter Kowalski. The 70-year-old Vietnam veteran sat quietly near the middle of the bus, his worn military jacket telling stories of service and sacrifice. The prosthetic leg, partially visible beneath his pressed khakis, marked him as someone who had given more than most for his country. His Vietnam veteran cap sat squarely on his graying head, a badge of honor that had earned him respect everywhere except in the presence of men like Vinny Torino. "Well, Well, well, Vinny crooned, moving toward Walter with theatrical slowness. What do we have here? A genuine American hero. Walter kept his eyes straight ahead, his military training teaching him to avoid confrontation when possible. But his hands, weathered by decades of honest labor, betrayed slight tremors that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with the recognition of impending violence. I'm talking to you, war hero, Vinny continued, positioning himself directly in Walter's line of sight. His crew moved to block the aisle, creating a wall of malicious intent that trapped the veteran in his seat. Nice leg. Tell me, where'd you lose the real one? Running away from the enemy. The bus went deadly silent. Even the engine seemed to quiet as if the vehicle itself understood the gravity of what was unfolding. Rico Martinez watched nervously. In his rearview mirror, his hand hovering near the radio that could summon help. If help could arrive in time, Walter's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure with the dignity of a man who had faced far worse than street thugs. I'd prefer to be left alone, sir, he said quietly, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone accustomed to de-escalating dangerous situations. Vinny's laugh was like breaking glass. Sir? Did you hear that, boys? The old cripple called. Me, sir. Maybe there's hope for this generation after all. He leaned closer, his breath reeking of alcohol and stimulants. But I asked you a question, Grandpa. Where'd you lose the leg? Don't make me ask again. Behind his book, Mike Tyson's. Fingers tightened imperceptibly around the pages. His breathing remained steady, but something primal was awakening, a protective instinct that had nothing to do with boxing and everything to do with basic human decency. The elderly woman who had been watching him earlier now saw his jaw muscles flex, recognition finally dawning in her eyes. Afghanistan, Walter answered quietly, hoping honesty might satisfy the bully's cruel curiosity. Roadside bomb. I was trying to what? Vinny interrupted, his voice rising with theatrical interest. Save your buddies? Play hero. He turned to his crew with exaggerated confusion. Weren't these the same guys who lost the war? How's that hero thing working out for you, old man? The insult hung in the air like poison, and Mike Tyson slowly, deliberately, closed his book. Walter Kowalski's hands instinctively moved to protect his Vietnam veteran cap as Vinny Torino's predatory smile widened. The veteran had survived 2 tours in hell, had watched friends die in rice paddies and jungle clearings, but something about this moment felt different, more personal, more deliberately cruel than the indifferent violence of war. What's this? Piece of garbage. Vinny snatched the cap from Walter's head with lightning quickness, the veteran's reflexes no match for a younger man's drug-fueled aggression. Vietnam veteran. What's that supposed to mean to me? The cap looked small and insignificant in Vinny's hands, but everyone on the bus understood they were witnessing the desecration of something sacred. Walter's face flushed with humiliation and rage, his military bearing cracking for the first time as he reached weakly for his stolen dignity. Please, Walter said, his voice barely above a whisper. That belonged to my unit. It's all I have left of what? Your failure. Vinny held the cap high above his head like a trophy, turning to his crew for approval. Tell me, war hero, how many babies did you kill over there? How many villages did you burn down for democracy? The words hit Walter like physical blows. His prosthetic leg shifted uncomfortably as he tried to rise from his seat, but Vinny placed a firm hand on his shoulder, forcing him back down. The veteran's eyes, which had seen the worst humanity could offer, now held a pain that went deeper than combat trauma. The anguish of having his service, his sacrifice, reduced to a punchline by someone who had never risked anything for anyone. I lost this leg trying to save my squad, Walter said, his voice stronger now, drawing strength from memories of men who had died believing their sacrifice meant something. There was an IED. I could have run, but I went back for bullshit. Vinny spat, throwing the cap to the floor of the bus and grinding it under his expensive sneaker. You guys were all cowards. Should have stayed home instead of playing soldier boy in someone else's sandbox. The sound of the cap being crushed underfoot was like a gunshot in the confined space. Several passengers winced. The young mother covered her daughter's eyes. Even Vinny's crew looked uncomfortable with this level of cruelty, but they held their positions like trained attack dogs awaiting their master's command. Mike Tyson's book lay forgotten in his lap, his eyes locked on the unfolding humiliation with the intensity of a predator selecting targets. The elderly Puerto Rican woman beside him had gone completely still, her recognition of the former champion now certain, her expression a mixture of anticipation and fear. Walter bent forward slowly, painfully, trying to retrieve his desecrated cap from the floor. His movements were stiff, limited by his prosthetic and the cruel geometry of the bus seat. Vinny watched with amusement, allowing the veteran to struggle for several long seconds before placing his foot deliberately on the old man's reaching hand. Vinny taunted, applying pressure. I didn't say you could have it back. Maybe if you apologize for wasting taxpayer money on your little vacation to Vietnam, I might consider it. The pressure on Walter's arthritic fingers caused him to gasp in pain, but he refused to cry out. Decades of discipline held firm even as his dignity crumbled around him. His other hand gripped the seat edge so tightly his knuckles went white. Vinny leaned down until his face was inches from Walter's. What's it gonna be, hero? You gonna apologize for being a failure, or do I need to teach you some respect? That's when he made his fatal mistake. Still holding Walter's hand trapped beneath his foot, Vinny placed his other hand on the veteran's shoulder and shoved, hard enough to cause real pain, hard enough to cross the line from psychological torture to physical assault, hard enough to awaken something terrible in the man sitting quietly in the back of the bus. Mike Tyson rose from his seat like a force of nature given human form, his presence filling the bus with an energy that made the air itself seem dangerous. That's enough. The two words cut through the bus like a blade through silk, carrying a weight and authority that instantly commanded attention. Mike Tyson's distinctive voice, that familiar lisp that had announced devastation to heavyweight champions across the globe, rose from the back of the bus with quiet, deadly certainty. Conversation stopped. Phones paused mid-scroll. Even the bus engine seemed to quiet as 43 passengers collectively held their breath. Tyson stood slowly, deliberately, his full 5'10" frame unfolding with the fluid grace of a natural predator. The gray hoodie couldn't disguise the massive shoulders beneath, couldn't hide the hands that had once been registered as lethal weapons. His baseball cap had shifted slightly, revealing more of the face that had graced magazine covers and terrorized opponents for decades. The recognition spread through the bus like wildfire. The elderly Puerto Rican woman's eyes widened in confirmation of what she'd suspected. The construction workers looked up from their phones with expressions of awe and anticipation. The young mother with the stroller whispered, "Oh my God," under her breath, instinctively backing away from what was about to unfold. Vinny Torino, still grinding Walter's cap beneath his foot, turned toward the voice with the swagger of a man too high on cocaine and his own perceived power to recognize imminent destruction. His crew, Mac and Joey, shifted nervously as they registered the change in atmosphere, their street instincts warning them that something had gone very, very wrong. "Who the hell are you supposed to be?" Vinny demanded, releasing Walter's trapped hand but maintaining his aggressive posture. The drugs in his system whispered lies about his own invincibility, drowning out the survival instincts that should have sent him running. Tyson stepped into the aisle, and suddenly the bus felt much smaller. His presence seemed to absorb light, to make the air itself thicker and more dangerous. Passengers pressed back against windows and seats, creating an impromptu arena in the center of the moving vehicle. "I'm someone who respects his elders," Tyson said, his voice never rising above conversational level, but somehow filling every corner of the bus. "And you're someone who's about to learn some manners." The phones came out then, a dozen devices, rising like flowers toward sunlight, their cameras focused on what every passenger understood would be a moment worth remembering. Rico Martinez, the bus driver, began slowing the vehicle, his experienced eyes recognizing the signs of impending violence. Walter looked up from his seat, his face a mixture of gratitude and amazement as he recognized his unlikely savior. The Vietnam veteran cap lay crushed between them, a symbol of disrespected service that had awakened something primal in one of boxing's greatest legends. Vinny's drug-addled brain finally processed what his eyes were seeing, but pride and stimulants proved a dangerous combination. Instead of backing down, he squared his shoulders and took a step toward the former heavyweight champion. "Iron Mike Tyson," he sneered, his voice carrying false bravado. "I ain't impressed, old man. Your time's over." The bus continued its slow deceleration as Tyson's hands dropped to his sides, fingers relaxing in the way that had once preceded destruction in rings across the world. Vincent Torino's haymaker came with all the telegraphed obviousness of an amateur throwing his first punch, his cocaine-fueled confidence translating into wild, undisciplined motion that would have embarrassed a middle school boxer. The swing carried the desperate aggression of a man who had relied on intimidation rather than skill his entire adult life. Mike Tyson slipped the punch with minimal effort, his head moving just enough to let Vinny's fist whistle harmlessly past his ear. Decades of muscle memory took control, the same reflexes that had made him the youngest heavyweight champion in history, that had terrorized a generation of professional fighters who possessed actual skill. The counterpunch came from a place deeper than technique, rising from Tyson's core with all the accumulated power of a lifetime spent perfecting the art of controlled violence. His right hand traveled barely 8 inches, but it carried the weight of legend behind it. The uppercut connected with Vinny's jaw like a thunderclap made flesh. The sound of impact echoed through the bus, bone meeting bone with the finality of Judgment Day. Vinny's feet left the ground entirely, his body lifting into the air before gravity reclaimed him and sent him crashing into the bus seats with enough force to bend the metal frames. He hit the floor unconscious before his crew could even process what they'd witnessed. Mac and Joey froze in absolute terror, their street-hardened bravado evaporating like morning mist. They had expected to back up their leader against some old man trying to play hero. Instead, they found themselves staring at a force of nature who had just demonstrated why legends never truly fade. Tyson didn't pursue them. Violence for its own sake had lost its appeal decades ago. Instead, he turned to Walter Kowalski, extending one massive hand to help the veteran to his feet with surprising gentleness. "Thank you for your service, sir," Tyson said quietly, retrieving the crushed military cap from the floor and carefully dusting it off before placing it back on Walter's head. The gesture carried more dignity than 1,000 medal ceremonies. The bus erupted. 43 passengers burst into spontaneous applause and cheers, their voices creating a cacophony of approval that drowned out the engine noise. Phones captured every angle of the aftermath, the footage already destined for viral fame. The construction workers hooped like they'd witnessed a championship bout. The young mother clapped while shielding her daughter's eyes from Vinny's unconscious form. "Mike! Mike! Mike!" Someone started chanting, and others picked up the rhythm, transforming the public bus into Madison Square Garden. Circa 1988, Rico Martinez pulled the bus to a complete stop, his hands shaking as he reached for the radio to call in what would undoubtedly be the most unusual incident report of his career. Through his rearview mirror, he watched passengers surge forward to shake the champion's hand, to take selfies with a living legend who had just proved that some things never change. Walter stood beside Tyson, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks as he adjusted his rescued cap. "I thought those days were over," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the celebration. "Nobody stands up anymore." "Some of us never stopped," Tyson replied, his attention already turning to the sirens approaching in the distance, knowing that this moment of justice would bring complications neither of them had anticipated. The NYPD units arrived with sirens wailing and lights painting the Brooklyn street in alternating red and blue. Detective Maria Santos emerged from the lead car, her experienced eyes immediately assessing the scene through the bus windows. An unconscious thug sprawled across damaged seats, a crowd of passengers filming with phones, and Mike Tyson standing protectively beside an elderly veteran. "Everybody stay calm," Santos announced as she boarded the bus, her badge held high. At 42, she'd worked these streets long enough to recognize when a situation was both complicated and completely justified. "I'm Detective Santos, NYPD. Who wants to tell me what happened here?" The response was immediate and overwhelming. 40 voices began speaking at once, passengers eager to defend the former champion and condemn the unconscious bully. Santos raised her hand for silence, then pointed to Rico Martinez, the bus driver. "You first. What did you see?" "That piece of garbage." Rico gestured toward Vinny. "He was torturing this old veteran. Stepped on his cap, pushed him around, Real sick stuff. Mr. Tyson here. He just defended the man. One punch, clean and righteous. Santos nodded, making notes while paramedics tended to Vinny. The thug was regaining consciousness, blood trickling from his mouth, his jaw already swelling to impressive proportions. As the medical team stabilized his neck and checked for serious injury, his eyes found Tyson with a look of pure hatred. "This ain't over," Vinny slurred through his damaged jaw, his voice thick with blood and rage. "You got no idea who you just messed with, Tyson. That old piece of garbage is already a dead man walking." The words hit the crowded bus like a bucket of ice water. Santos stepped closer to Vinny's stretcher, her hand instinctively moving to her service weapon. "What did you just say?" Vinny's drug-addled brain realized his mistake too late. "Nothing. I ain't saying nothing without my lawyer." But the damage was done. Santos exchanged a meaningful look with Tyson, both understanding that this wasn't a random act of bullying. She turned to Walter, who was still adjusting his rescued military cap with trembling fingers. "Sir, I need you to come with me to the station. Both of you," she added, looking at Tyson. "We need to talk about what just happened here." As the paramedics loaded Vinny into the ambulance, he managed one final threat. "3 days, old man. 3 days, and you'll wish you'd taken the money." Walter's face went white. Santos grabbed him by the arm as he swayed unsteadily. "What money? Mr. Kowalski, what is he talking about?" "The letters," Walter whispered. "I've been getting letters for weeks. Death threats. Someone wants me to move out of my building, wants to buy my apartment. I thought they were just trying to scare me." Santos felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. She'd been investigating a pattern of elder harassment across Brooklyn, always connected to property deals, always involving vulnerable residents in rent-controlled buildings. The cases never seemed connected until now. "Mr. Tyson," she said, "I think you just stepped into something a lot bigger than a bus fight." Tyson looked down at Walter, seeing not just a fellow warrior, but a symbol of everything worth protecting in a world that too often forgot to honor its heroes. "Detective, I think that's exactly where I needed to be." The Brooklyn North Precinct felt like a second home to Detective Santos, its familiar blend of coffee, disinfectant, and human desperation as much a part of her daily routine as breathing. She led Mike Tyson and Walter Kowalski through the maze of desks toward interview room B, aware that every cop in the building was stealing glances at the legendary boxer walking through their workplace. "Coffee," she offered, settling them into chairs around a scarred metal table that had witnessed countless confessions and confrontations. Both men accepted, and Santos took a moment to study Walter Kowalski more carefully. Beneath the shock and gratitude, she recognized something she'd seen too often lately: the haunted look of an elderly person living in fear. "Mr. Kowalski, tell me about these letters," she began, pulling out a digital recorder and setting it between them. "Everything, from the beginning." Walter's weathered hands shook slightly as he reached into his jacket pocket, producing 3 envelopes that had clearly been handled multiple times. The return address read Urban Renewal Solutions, but the contents were anything but professional. "Started about a month ago," Walter said, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. "First one was polite, talking about generous offers for my apartment. When I didn't respond, they got nastier." Santos opened the first letter, her expression darkening as she read. The language escalated from business proposition to barely veiled threat with each subsequent communication. The final letter was explicit: "Old soldiers die easy. Take the money or take the consequences." "There's more," Walter continued. "My building, 1247 Prospect Place. It houses mostly veterans. Danny Martinez from Vietnam, Carol O'Brien from the Gulf War, Frank Romano from Korea. We've all been getting these letters. Same company, same threats." Santos felt the familiar tingle of a major case unfolding. She opened her laptop and pulled up a file marked Elder Harassment, Pattern Analysis. Photos and reports filled the screen, documenting similar incidents across Brooklyn. "Look at this," she said, turning the screen toward Tyson. 12 cases in the past 3 months. All elderly residents, all in rent-controlled apartments, all receiving offers, backed by increasingly violent intimidation. When people refuse to sell, accidents start happening. Broken windows, graffiti, small fires. Tyson studied the screen with the intensity he'd once reserved for studying opponent footage. "This is organized," he said. "This isn't just some punk looking for easy money." "Exactly." Santos pulled up property records. "Your building, Mr. Kowalski, sits on prime real estate. If cleared for development, it's worth millions. But as long as rent-controlled tenants remain, it's essentially worthless to developers." Walter's face went pale as the scope of the threat became clear. "You're saying they want to force us all out? All the veterans?" "I'm saying someone's running a systematic campaign to displace vulnerable elderly residents for profit," Santos replied. "And they're using street muscle like Vincent Torino to do their dirty work." She turned to Tyson. "That threat he made on the bus wasn't just anger talking. These people have escalated to violence before. Mrs. Chun in Park Slope was hospitalized after falling downstairs. Mr. Rodriguez in Crown Heights had his apartment firebombed. Both took buyout offers immediately afterward." Tyson's hands slowly clenched into fists. "How is this legal?" "It's not," Santos said. "But proving conspiracy requires evidence, and scared elderly people don't make great witnesses. Until today, we couldn't connect the street violence to the corporate interests behind it." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But Vincent Torino just made a mistake. He threatened Mr. Kowalski in front of 40 witnesses and one very famous advocate for justice." Walter looked between them, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You want to use me as bait. I want to protect you," Tyson said firmly. "Detective, give me his address. If these people want to threaten a veteran, they'll have to go through me first." Santos held up a warning hand. "Mr. Tyson, this could be bigger than just street thugs. If there's organized crime involvement, if there are corrupt officials protecting this operation, then they'll learn the same lesson Vincent Torino just learned." Tyson interrupted, his voice carrying the quiet certainty of a man who had never backed down from a fight that mattered. "Some things are worth the risk." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Prospect Place as Mike Tyson and Walter Kowalski approached 1247, a five-story pre-war building that wore its age with dignity. Despite obvious neglect, red brick facade showed patches of recent repair work, while new graffiti competed with decades-old architectural details for visual attention. "Home sweet home," Walter said with bitter irony, gesturing toward broken security cameras dangling like dead eyes from the building's corners. "Used to be the pride of the neighborhood. Now it's just a target." The small lobby retained hints of former grandeur. Marble floors worn smooth by generations of residents. Brass mailboxes that someone still polished despite everything. But fresh scratches marred the walls, and the smell of recent smoke lingered in the air like a warning. "Walter," a woman's voice boomed from the stairwell as Carol Big Red O'Brien descended, her work boots thundering against the steps. At 55, she moved with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to fixing problems with her own hands. Red hair streaked with gray framed a face that had seen combat and wasn't impressed by much, until she spotted Mike Tyson standing beside her neighbor. "Well, I'll be damned," she said, extending a calloused hand toward the former champion. "Carol O'Brien, Gulf War, Army mechanic. Heard about what you did for Walter on the bus. That took guts." "Ma'am," Tyson replied respectfully, accepting her firm handshake. "Just did what anyone should do." "Anyone should, but most don't," came a trembling voice from the mailboxes. Danny Martinez, 68, turned slowly toward them, his hands shaking from medication and old trauma. Vietnam had left invisible scars that decades hadn't healed, but his eyes held the sharp intelligence of a survivor. "Danny Martinez, 1st Infantry Division. Heard you were coming." The introductions continued as more residents emerged from the building's depths. Frank Romano, 75, Korean War veteran and retired FDNY, moved carefully but proudly. Each carried themselves with the distinctive bearing of people who had served something larger than themselves, though fear had crept into their movements like arthritis. 12 apartments total, Carol explained as they gathered in the lobby. 8 occupied by veterans or their families. The other 4 cleared out after the threats started getting serious. She produced a folder thick with documentation, photographs of vandalism, copies of threatening letters, police reports that went nowhere. Urban Renewal Solutions has been very persistent. Started with flowers and business cards, escalated to dead rats in the hallway. Danny's hands shook more violently as he spoke. They know our schedules, our routines. Called me at 3 a.m. last week, played recordings of my granddaughter walking to school. That's when we knew this wasn't just about money, Frank added. His firefighter's instincts recognizing arson when he smelled it. Small fires in the basement, electrical problems that didn't exist before. Professional work meant to scare. Tyson absorbed every detail, his tactical mind already cataloging vulnerabilities and defensive positions. These weren't just elderly citizens. They were warriors who had earned the right to age in peace. "Show me everything," he said quietly. "Every threat, every weakness, every way they've tried to hurt you. It's time these people learned what happens when you mess with America's heroes." Walter's one-bedroom apartment on the third floor told the story of a life lived with purpose and pride. Military commendations hung beside family photographs, while a carefully maintained Purple Heart citation occupied the place of honor above a modest television. The space was spotless, organized with military precision, but bars on the windows revealed how paradise had become a prison. "Eleanor's visiting her sister in New Jersey," Walter explained, settling into his favorite chair with visible relief. "Didn't want her here while this was happening. 43 years of marriage, and I've never seen her so scared." Tyson studied the apartment's layout, noting sight lines and defensive positions with the same intensity he'd once reserved for scouting opponents. The fire escape outside the bedroom window could be an asset or liability, depending on circumstances. The narrow hallway leading to the front door created a natural choke point. "Tell me about your unit," Tyson said, settling onto the small couch. Walter's weathered face transformed as he retrieved a photo album. Decades of pain temporarily replaced by pride. "3rd Battalion, 22nd Infantry," Walter said, opening to a page of young soldiers in jungle fatigues. "Lost half these boys to an ambush outside Da Nang. I was trying to get to my squad leader when the IED took my leg." His fingers traced faces frozen in eternal youth. "Funny thing, all these years later, I still dream about going back for them." A soft knock interrupted the moment. Danny Martinez entered slowly, carrying building blueprints that shook in his trembling hands. His PTSD medications created a constant battle between necessary calm and debilitating fog, but his mind remained sharp when his community needed him. "Got these from city records," Danny said, spreading architectural drawings across Walter's dining table. "Carol helped me request them before things got really bad." The blueprints revealed the building's bones, solid construction from an era when buildings were built to last, but also multiple points of vulnerability. Service tunnels, basement access, roof entry points that someone with bad intentions could exploit. Carol O'Brien arrived moments later, her mechanic's coveralls replaced by civilian clothes, but her commanding presence unchanged. She carried a toolkit and a thermos of coffee strong enough to wake the dead. "Been thinking about security," she announced, accepting Tyson's offer of Walter's second chair. "Building's got good bones, but the cameras are dead, locks are jokes, and the basement's wide open to anyone with basic tools." She produced photographs, documenting recent maintenance issues, cut phone lines, disabled alarm systems, basement doors forced open and poorly repaired. "They've been probing our defenses for weeks, testing response times, seeing how long it takes police to show up." "How long?" Tyson asked. "Average response time is 12 minutes, Danny replied, consulting notes written in the precise handwriting of a former military clerk. "Assuming they respond at all. Last 3 calls, they classified as domestic disputes and sent 1 unit that took statements and left." Tyson felt the familiar rage building, not the explosive anger of his youth, but the cold fury of a mature man witnessing injustice. These veterans had given everything for their country, and now they were being abandoned by the system they'd served. "That changes now," he said quietly. "Carol, what do you need to make this building secure?" "New locks, working cameras, motion sensors, communication system between apartments," she rattled off without hesitation. "Also need coordination between residents. Buddy system, nobody goes out alone, regular check-ins." "Danny, you understand these people's tactics better than anyone," Tyson continued. "Psychological warfare, systematic intimidation. How do we turn their strengths against them?" Danny's hands steadied as purpose overrode anxiety. Document everything, create multiple copies, establish outside communications they can't monitor. Most importantly, never let them isolate us. Tyson's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Nice building you're protecting. Hope you're a light sleeper. A friend. The psychological warfare had begun. Detective Maria Santos climbed the steps of 1247 Prospect Place with the purposeful stride of someone carrying bad news that couldn't wait. The manila folder under her arm contained intelligence that would transform a local harassment case into something approaching organized crime, complete with political connections that reached into Brooklyn's power structure. Tyson met her at the building's entrance, where Carol O'Brien was installing a new security camera with the precision of someone who had maintained military equipment under combat conditions. The afternoon light caught the fresh scratches around the building's locks, evidence of recent probing by people who understood basic breaking and entering. "We need to talk," Santos said without preamble. "All of you. What I'm about to share changes everything." Minutes later, the building's remaining residents gathered in Carol's apartment, the largest space available since her living room could accommodate 8 people if everyone squeezed together. Walter sat beside Eleanor's empty chair, his wife's absence a reminder of how much these threats had already cost. Danny Martinez occupied a corner where he could see all entrances and exits, old habits dying hard. Vincent Torino works for Tommy. The Torch, Benedetto, Santos announced, opening her folder to reveal surveillance photos of a compact man in expensive suits. Mid-level organized crime, specializes in property acquisition through intimidation. His operation is sophisticated, legitimate front companies, political connections, and enough muscle to handle anyone who doesn't take hints. She spread additional photos across Carol's coffee table. Tommy operates out of the Roma Social Club in Bensonhurst, but his reach extends throughout Brooklyn. The Urban Renewal Solutions letters you've been receiving? They're backed by Meridian Development Corporation, which has connections to City Councilman Richard Hartley, the same Hartley who's been pushing for neighborhood redevelopment. Frank Romano asked, his firefighter's knowledge of city politics proving useful. The one who keeps talking about revitalizing rent-controlled housing. His brother-in-law owns Meridian Development, Santos confirmed. The scheme is worth potentially $50 million in development profits if they can clear enough rent-controlled buildings. Your building alone is worth $8 million as luxury condos. Tyson studied the photographs with growing understanding. This isn't just about one building. They're running a systematic campaign across multiple neighborhoods. Exactly. We've identified 17 buildings targeted for renewal, all housing elderly residents on fixed incomes. The pattern is always the same. Friendly offers escalate to psychological warfare, then physical intimidation, finally violence serious enough to hospitalize people who won't sell. Danny's hands had stopped shaking as his military mind processed the intelligence. Classic campaign strategy. Identify vulnerable targets, isolate them from support networks, apply increasing pressure until resistance collapses. The problem is proving conspiracy, Santos continued. Tommy's smart enough to use intermediaries, shell companies, plausible deniability. Until today, we couldn't connect the street violence to the corporate interests behind it. She turned to Tyson with an expression that mixed respect and concern. Your intervention on the bus was the first time someone fought back hard enough to get their attention. Vincent's threat wasn't just anger. It was operational planning. What kind of timeline are we looking at? Carol asked, her mechanics mind already calculating resources and defensive requirements. Based on previous patterns, escalation accelerates quickly once they identify resistance. Mrs. Chun in Park Slope was hospitalized within 72 hours of refusing a final offer. Mr. Rodriguez's apartment was firebombed the same night. He called police about threats. Walter's voice was quiet but determined. So we're at war. Your target's in someone else's war, Santos corrected. But now you have allies who know how to fight back. Tyson's phone buzzed again. Another unknown number, another message. Talk to Vincent. Heard you like protecting old people. Let's see how good you are at it. TB, the initials were clear. Tommy Benedetto had just made this personal. Detective, Tyson said, showing her the message. I think we just got our proof of direct involvement. Santos photographed the screen, her expression grim. and you just became enemy number one of a very dangerous man. The transformation of Carol O'Brien's apartment into a command center happened, with military efficiency that impressed even Mike Tyson. Within hours, the living room had been converted into a training space where elderly veterans relearned skills they'd hoped never to need again. Basic self-defense starts with awareness, Tyson explained to the assembled residents, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had taught destruction to professionals. These people rely on intimidation, on making you feel helpless. We're going to change that equation. Eleanor Kowalski had returned from New Jersey that morning, refusing Walter's pleas to stay away. At 67, she moved with the determined grace of a woman who had spent decades caring for a wounded warrior and wasn't about to abandon him now. Her presence completed the circle, transforming a group of frightened individuals into a family preparing to defend their home. Buddy system, Carol announced, consulting a chart she'd created with military precision. Nobody goes out alone, everybody checks in every 4 hours. Danny's apartment becomes our communication center. He's got the best view of all approaches. Danny, Martinez nodded, his PTSD medication balanced against the clarity that came from having a mission again. Motion sensors go active at sundown. Cameras feed to my tablet, and I've got Detective Santos on speed dial. The local news crew arrived at 3 p.m., alerted by a tip that Iron Mike Tyson was defending Brooklyn veterans from organized crime. Angela Chun, an ambitious reporter from Channel 7, recognized a story that would resonate far beyond local news. Mr. Tyson, she began, her camera operator positioning for the best angle, why have you chosen to get involved in what some are calling a civil housing dispute? Because threatening elderly veterans isn't civil, Tyson replied, his distinctive voice carrying across the small crowd that had gathered. These people served their country, sacrificed for our freedom. They've earned the right to age with dignity, not live in fear of criminals who think weakness is an opportunity. The interview went viral within hours. Social media exploded with support for the veterans and admiration for Tyson's intervention. Hashtag Iron Mike Defends Vets began trending, accompanied by photos and videos from the bus incident. Donation offers poured in through a GoFundMe account Carol had hastily created, but the attention brought complications along with support. Channel 5 wants an exclusive, Eleanor reported, consulting a notepad filled with media requests. Fox News wants a remote interview, and someone from the mayor's office called about peaceful resolution of housing disputes. Peaceful resolution, Frank Romano snorted, his firefighter's cynicism intact despite his 75 years. They want us to shut up and disappear quietly. Danny's tablet chimed with incoming camera feeds showing unmarked vans circling the building. We've got watchers, he announced, his voice steady despite the implications. Same 2 vehicles for the past hour. Tyson moved to the window, studying the street with tactical awareness. Professional surveillance meant the stakes had escalated beyond street-level intimidation. Tommy Benedetto was taking his intervention seriously enough to commit resources. Let them watch, he said quietly. But they need to understand something. This building is under protection now. Anyone who wants to hurt these people will have to go through me first. His phone rang with a call from Detective Santos. Mike, we've got a problem. Vincent Torino made bail 2 hours ago. His lawyer is connected to the same firm that represents Meridian Development Corporation. Through the window, Tyson watched one of the surveillance vans drive slowly past the building's entrance. Inside, he could see the silhouette of someone photographing the residents gathered in Carol's apartment. Detective, he said, his voice carrying the calm certainty of a man who had never backed down from a fight that mattered. I think they're about to make their next move. The psychological warfare was escalating, but Mike Tyson had spent a lifetime turning other people's aggressive moves against them. This would be no different. Except now he wasn't fighting for championship belts or personal glory. He was fighting for something infinitely more valuable. The right of America's heroes to live without fear. The morning news crews arrived before dawn, their satellite trucks transforming Prospect Place into a media circus that would have impressed a Hollywood premiere. Angela Chin's viral story had sparked national interest, turning a local housing dispute into a symbol of everything Americans believed about protecting their heroes. Mike Tyson emerged from the building at 6 a.m. to find reporters. From CNN, Fox News, and NBC waiting with cameras rolling and questions ready. The former champion had faced hostile media before, but this felt different. These journalists sensed a story that transcended sports, touching something deeper about American values and the treatment of veterans. Mr. Tyson called Maria Rodriguez. From Good Morning America, some critics say celebrities shouldn't intervene in complex housing disputes. How do you respond? This isn't complex, Tyson replied, his distinctive voice carrying clearly across the small crowd. You don't threaten elderly veterans. You don't intimidate people who sacrificed for our freedom. That's not housing policy. That's basic human decency. His words resonated beyond the immediate audience. Within hours, social media exploded with support. Hashtag Defend Our Veterans joined hashtag Iron Mike Defends Vets as trending hashtags. Video clips of Tyson's interviews spread across platforms, generating millions of views and overwhelming public support. Local businesses responded immediately. Janetti's Bakery delivered free breakfast for the residents and media. Brooklyn Hardware donated security equipment. 3 separate contractors offered free building repairs. The gesture that touched Tyson most came from PS 256, where third graders had made cards thanking the veterans for their service, but not all attention was positive. While we appreciate Mr. Tyson's good intentions, City Councilman Richard Hartley announced during his own hastily arranged press conference, vigilante justice is not the answer to legitimate housing concerns. We encourage all parties to seek peaceful, legal resolutions through proper channels. Hartley's measured words couldn't disguise his nervousness. Detective Santos watched the press conference from her office, noting how the councilman's eyes darted away from direct questions about his brother-in-law's development company, the media. Attention had an unexpected side effect. Other elderly residents across Brooklyn began calling police to report similar harassment. Santos fielded 17 new complaints in one morning, each following the familiar pattern of escalating threats from Urban Renewal Solutions. This is bigger than we thought, she told Tyson during a brief phone call. Your intervention has encouraged others to speak up. We might be looking at a citywide criminal conspiracy. That evening, as news crews packed their equipment and social media celebrated Tyson's stand for veteran rights, someone slipped an envelope under his door in the building's basement apartment. The handwriting was precise, professional, chilling. In its simplicity, all the cameras in the world won't save them when we're ready. This is your last warning. Stop now, or watch them suffer for your ego. T.B. Tommy Benedetto had just declared war on Iron Mike Tyson, but the former champion wasn't intimidated by threats from cowards who targeted the elderly. If anything, the note confirmed he was exactly where he needed to be. 3 days of blessed silence settled over 1247, Prospect Place like morning sunshine after a storm. No threatening phone calls jarred residents awake. No mysterious strangers circled the building in unmarked vans. Even the graffiti that had appeared weekly on the building's facade remained conspicuously absent. Maybe they got the message. Eleanor Kowalski suggested during the impromptu celebration that had transformed the building's small courtyard into a block party. Food trucks donated by local supporters lined the street, while children played under the watchful eyes of grandparents who finally felt safe enough to venture outside. Carol O'Brien manned a grill donated by Home Depot, flipping burgers with the same precision she'd once applied to maintaining military vehicles. Could be they realized messing with Mike Tyson was a losing proposition, she said, though her mechanics instincts warned her that complex problems rarely had simple solutions. Danny Martinez sat beneath a makeshift canopy, his medication allowing him to enjoy the crowd without the overwhelming anxiety that usually accompanied large gatherings. His granddaughter Rachel played nearby, her laughter mixing with the voices of other children who had returned to visit grandparents no longer living in fear. This is what peace looks like, Walter said, settling beside Tyson on folding chairs someone had provided. The veteran's military bearing had returned, his shoulders straight with renewed dignity. First time in months I've seen Eleanor smile, without worry behind her eyes. Local politicians arrived throughout the afternoon, everyone except Councilman Hartley, whose conspicuous absence spoke louder than any speech. Veterans groups from across the city brought food and fellowship. Television crews captured images of community solidarity that would play on evening news programs nationwide. Detective Santos made a brief appearance, her professional satisfaction evident as she watched elderly residents moving freely in their own neighborhood. "Haven't had a single harassment report in 72 hours, she told Tyson. "Whatever you did, it worked." The celebration reached its emotional peak when Walter approached Tyson with a small wooden box that had clearly been in his family for decades. Inside, cushioned by faded velvet, lay a Purple Heart medallion, not Walter's own, but one belonging to his squad leader who had died in the ambush that cost Walter his leg. "Sergeant Rodriguez never made it home to receive this," Walter said, his voice thick with emotion. "His family gave it to me before his funeral, said he would have wanted me to have it. But I think he'd want you to have it now." The courtyard fell silent as Walter pressed the medal into Tyson's hands. The former champion, who had received countless awards and accolades, found himself moved beyond words by this simple gesture from a man who had given everything for his country. "I can't accept this," Tyson whispered. "You already have," Walter replied, "by standing up when nobody else would, by proving that heroes still exist." As evening approached and the celebration wound down, Tyson made a decision that felt both natural and necessary. "I'll stay one more night," he told Carol. "Make sure everything's secure. Then tomorrow, I'll transition back to my regular schedule." The building felt safe, protected, normal again. For the first time since the bus incident, Mike Tyson allowed himself to believe that sometimes the good guys really could win without throwing a single punch. At 2:47 a.m., fire alarms shrieked through 1247 Prospect Place with an urgency that transformed peaceful sleep into panicked awakening. Mike Tyson bolted upright in the basement superintendent's apartment, his fighter's instincts immediately distinguishing between malfunction and genuine emergency. The acrid smell of gasoline and burning fabric confirmed his worst fears that he grabbed his phone and rushed toward the stairwell, already dialing 911 while his mind processed the tactical situation. The alarms were coming from the fourth floor, Carol O'Brien's apartment. The same woman who had grilled burgers and laughed with children just hours earlier was now trapped in a building designed to become her tomb. "Fire department, this is Mike Tyson at 1247 Prospect Place." He barked into the phone while taking stairs 3 at a time. "Fourth floor apartment, possible arson attack, elderly residents trapped." Carol's door stood open, orange flames licking through the apartment like hungry tongues. Her living room, the same space where they'd planned community defense and celebrated their apparent victory, was engulfed in fire that moved too fast and burned too hot to be accidental. "Carol," Tyson shouted, plunging into smoke thick enough to choke a horse. He found her in the kitchen, trapped behind a wall of flame that had been deliberately set to block her escape route. The mechanic's coveralls that had become her uniform were singed but not burning, her face streaked with soot and determination. "Kitchen window," she coughed, pointing toward their only viable exit. "Fire escape." While Tyson helped Carol toward safety, chaos erupted throughout the building. In the basement, masked figures had entered through service doors that should have been secured. They moved with military precision, their faces covered but their intentions crystal clear. Walter Kowalski emerged from his third-floor apartment to investigate the alarms and walked directly into Vincent Torino's revenge. The street thug, his jaw still wired from Tyson's uppercut, took his fury out on the elderly veteran with a baseball bat that connected with Walter's ribs with sickening precision. "This is what happens when you get Iron Mike involved," Vinny snarled, raising the bat for another blow. "Old man should have taken the money." Eleanor's screams echoed through the hallway as her husband collapsed, blood streaming from his scalp, where the bat had connected. At 67, she threw herself between the attacker and her wounded husband with the fierce protectiveness of someone who had already lost too much to allow more. Danny Martinez, awakened by alarms that triggered memories of incoming mortars in Vietnam, suffered a complete PTSD episode that left him catatonic in his apartment doorway. His granddaughter Rachel, staying overnight for the first time in months, could only watch in terror as her grandfather relived combat trauma while smoke filled the hallway. By the time fire trucks and ambulances arrived, the damage was devastating and deliberately comprehensive. Carol's apartment was destroyed, her lifetime of possessions reduced to ash and memory. Walter lay unconscious on a stretcher, Eleanor holding his hand while paramedics worked to stabilize his internal bleeding. Iron Mike can't be everywhere had been spray-painted across the building's front entrance in letters 3 feet tall. The message clear and personal. Detective Santos arrived to find Tyson standing in the courtyard where children had played. Safely just hours earlier, watching his friends loaded into ambulances while their home burned around them. His face was streaked with soot and something much darker. "They waited," he said quietly. "Let us think we'd won, then hit us when our guard was down." Tommy Benedetto had just taught Mike Tyson a lesson in psychological warfare, and the tuition had been paid in the blood of America's heroes. Brooklyn Methodist Hospital at dawn felt like a morgue dressed up for the living. Mike Tyson sat in the intensive care waiting room, still wearing clothes that smelled of smoke and failure, watching Eleanor Kowalski pace the sterile corridor with the mechanical persistence of someone afraid to stop moving. 16 stitches. In his scalp, 3 cracked ribs, and internal bleeding. She recited for the 4th time, her voice hollow with shock. 43 years of marriage, and I've never seen him look so fragile. Detective Santos arrived with coffee and devastating news that would reshape their understanding of the enemy they faced. The attack was coordinated and professional, she reported, settling into the uncomfortable plastic chair beside Tyson. Multiple entry points, surveillance cameras disabled with precision timing, no forensic evidence left behind except the message they wanted us to find. Through the waiting room's windows, Brooklyn awakened to news coverage that painted a very different picture than the celebration just hours earlier. Vigilante violence escalates, dominated morning headlines. Tyson's intervention backfires, led local news broadcasts. Talking heads debated whether celebrity involvement had made the situation worse for everyone involved. Carol O'Brien sat in the Red Cross shelter downtown. Everything she owned reduced to the clothes she'd been wearing when the fire started. Her lifetime of tools, photographs, and memories had been incinerated in minutes by people who viewed human suffering as acceptable collateral damage in their pursuit of profit. "She's not coming back," Santos said quietly. "Can't rebuild at 55, can't risk it happening again." Taking the buyout offer and moving to her sister's place in Jersey. Frank Romano arrived at the hospital with moving boxes and defeat etched into his weathered features. "My granddaughter's safety comes first," he explained to Tyson, unable to meet the champion's eyes. 40 years fighting fires, but I can't fight this." Taking their money and leaving today. One by one, the residents of 1247 Prospect Place made the same heartbreaking calculation. Danny Martinez, sedated after his PTSD episode, would be transferred to a VA psychiatric facility. His son Michael was already arranging to move his father to a secured veteran housing facility outside the city by noon. The building that had housed a community of heroes stood nearly empty, its remaining residents packing their lives into boxes. While contractors hired by Urban Renewal Solutions waited outside with cleanup crews and demolition permits. Tommy Benedetto's lawyer issued a statement expressing deep regret about the violence and offering to personally mediate a peaceful resolution for the remaining tenants. The hypocrisy was breathtaking, but legally bulletproof. "They won," Santos said, watching another moving truck load someone's life into the back of a vehicle. Systematic intimidation followed by targeted violence. Classic organized crime strategy, and it worked perfectly. Tyson's phone rang with a call from a block number. Tommy Benedetto's voice dripped with mock sympathy. "Sorry about your friends, champ. Maybe next time you'll mind your own business. Still got a few residents left if you want to keep playing hero." For the first time in his adult life, Mike Tyson faced an opponent he couldn't simply punch into submission. Standing at the hospital window, looking out at a city that had made him, he realized that sometimes the strongest fists in the world weren't enough to protect the people who mattered most. The greatest fight of his life was just beginning, and he was losing badly. Walter Kowalski's hand felt fragile as tissue paper when he squeezed Mike Tyson's fingers, but his grip carried the desperate strength of a man clinging to something more valuable than his own life. The veteran's eyes, clouded by medication and pain, focused with military precision on the face of the champion who had tried to protect him. "Don't let them win," Walter whispered, his voice barely audible above the hospital machinery that monitored his broken body. Promise me, Mike. Don't let them win. The words hit Tyson harder than any punch he'd ever absorbed in the ring. This man, this genuine American hero, was lying in intensive care because he dared to stand up for what was right. Because Mike Tyson had given him hope that justice still mattered in a world that seemed to have forgotten its own values. I promise, Tyson replied, though the words felt hollow against the weight of his failure. The afternoon visit to 1247 Prospect Place confirmed his worst fears. The building that had housed a community of heroes now resembled a war zone in the final stages of surrender. Moving trucks lined the street like hearses, carrying away the lives of people who had already sacrificed everything for their country. Carol O'Brien stood beside a red cross van that contained everything she now owned: 2 suitcases and a heart full of ashes. Her mechanic's coveralls had been replaced by donated clothes that didn't fit quite right, making her look smaller somehow, diminished by loss. "I don't blame you," she said when Tyson approached, though her eyes couldn't meet his. "You tried to help. But I'm 55 years old, Mike. I can't rebuild again. Can't risk watching everything burn a second time." Frank Romano was loading the last of his possessions into his grandson's pickup truck, his firefighter's uniform carefully folded in the front seat like a flag being prepared for a veteran's funeral. At 75, starting over felt impossible, but staying felt like suicide. 40 years I fought fires, he said, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. Saved hundreds of people from burning buildings. But I can't save myself from this. My granddaughter, she's only 8. What if they hurt her to get to me? By evening, only 3 families remained in the 12-unit building. Danny's son Michael had arrived from Queens with a moving crew and grim determination to relocate his traumatized father to a secure veteran facility. The Washingtons from 2B were packing quietly, their teenage son helping carry boxes with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had given up fighting. The media narrative had shifted dramatically. Headlines that had celebrated Tyson's heroism now questioned his judgment. Tyson's intervention backfires dominated local news. Celebrity vigilante makes situation worse trended on social media alongside images of elderly residents fleeing their homes. His phone rang as he stood in the building's damaged lobby, watching America's heroes abandon their last sanctuary. "You, ready to throw in the towel, champ?" Tommy Benedetto's voice dripped with triumph. "Or do you want to see how much worse this gets? I've got connections you can't imagine, resources you can't match." This was just the warm-up. Tyson closed his eyes, feeling the weight of every broken promise, every failed protection, every elderly hero forced to abandon their home because he hadn't been strong enough to keep them safe. Cypress Hills Cemetery stretched across Queens. Like a city of the dead, its weathered headstones marking the final resting places of champions and ordinary heroes alike. Mike Tyson walked slowly among the graves until he found the simple marker he sought. Cus D'Amato, 1908 to 1985, trainer, father, friend. The man who had saved him from the streets, who had channeled his rage into purpose, lay beneath earth that had been accepting visitors for over a century. Tyson knelt beside the grave, his massive hands folding in unconscious prayer as he sought guidance from the only father figure he'd ever truly trusted. "I'm losing, cuz," he whispered to the stone. "Not in the ring. I know how to handle that. But these people, these veterans, they're getting hurt because of me. What would you do?" The memory came unbidden, as clear as if the old trainer were standing beside him. "Every fight is won before you step in the ring, Mike. You study your opponent, learn his weaknesses, find the angles he doesn't protect. Raw power wins fights, but intelligence wins wars." Tyson closed his eyes, remembering countless training sessions where Cuz had emphasized strategy over strength, patience over aggression. The old man had been preparing him for more than boxing. He'd been teaching him how to think like a champion in every aspect of life. "You're fighting this like a street brawl," he could hear Cuz saying. "But this isn't about throwing punches. This is chess, and you've been playing checkers." The revelation hit him with startling clarity. Tommy Benedetto had been manipulating him from the beginning, using Tyson's protective instincts to escalate a situation that benefited the criminal. Enterprise. Every punch thrown, every public stand taken, had played into their strategy of making the victims look like collateral damage in someone else's war. But what if the victim became the weapon? Tyson pulled out his phone and called Detective Santos. I have an idea, but you're not going to like it. I'm listening, she replied, though her voice carried the weariness of someone who had watched too many good people get hurt. We use me as bait. I announce I'm backing down, withdrawing my protection, encouraging the veterans to take the buyout offers. Tommy and his bosses will want to celebrate, maybe even document their victory. If we can get them on tape admitting to the conspiracy. Mike, that's incredibly dangerous. If they suspect you're wearing a wire, then they'll learn the same lesson Vincent Torino learned, Tyson interrupted. But this time, we'll have evidence that takes down the entire operation. Santos was quiet for a long moment. It could work. I've got FBI contacts who've been building a case against Meridian Development. But if this goes wrong, it won't, Tyson said, though his conviction felt fragile against the weight of recent failures. Cuz always said the best defense is making your opponent think he's winning right up until the moment you destroy him. Standing to leave his mentor's grave, Tyson felt something shift inside him, not the explosive rage that had once made him famous, but the cold calculation of a man who understood that sometimes the greatest victory required the appearance of absolute defeat. I'm going to do something that goes against every instinct I have, he told the headstone. I'm going to quit. Publicly. Completely. And then I'm going to let them think they've broken me. The hardest fight of his life was about to begin, and it would start with surrender. The press conference outside 1247 Prospect Place drew a larger crowd than Tyson's championship fights, but the energy was entirely different. Where once reporters had gathered to witness triumph, now they assembled to document what appeared to be surrender. Mike Tyson stood before the microphones with the defeated posture of a man who had finally accepted the limits of his own power. I'm stepping back, he announced, his distinctive voice carrying none of its usual confidence. My involvement in this situation may have inadvertently escalated tensions and put the people I was trying to protect in greater danger. The words tasted like poison, but they were carefully chosen for maximum effect. Behind the cameras, Detective Santos watched from an unmarked car, knowing that every syllable was being recorded by Tommy Benedetto's surveillance team. I encourage the remaining residents to make the best decisions for their families and their safety, Tyson continued, each word a knife thrust into his own principles. Sometimes the greatest courage is knowing when to walk away. The media response was immediate and brutal. Twitter exploded with hashtags like #TysonQuits and #AbandonVeterans. Sports commentators who had praised his intervention now questioned his character. Social media influencers pivoted from celebration to condemnation with the attention span of digital goldfish. Iron Mike throws in the towel dominated evening news broadcasts. Boxing legend abandons veterans trended across platforms. The narrative was exactly what Tommy Benedetto needed. Tyson portrayed as a washed-up celebrity who had gotten in over his head and abandoned vulnerable people when the situation became difficult. Within hours, Tommy scheduled a meeting with his organizational superiors. The Roma Social Club in Bensonhurst buzzed with celebration as word spread that the famous boxer had finally been neutralized. City Councilman Richard Hartley emerged from hiding to give interviews about the importance of letting proper authorities handle complex housing issues. Detective Santos coordinated with FBI agent Patricia Valdez, whose organized crime task force had been building a case against Meridian Development Corporation for months. This could be the break we need, Valdez explained during their secure phone call. If Tyson can get them talking about their methods, admitting to the violence, we can bring conspiracy charges against everyone involved. Eleanor Kowalski watched the press conference from Walter's hospital room, her husband still heavily sedated but stable enough to understand what was happening. He's not giving up, she said quietly. That man has a plan. The remaining residents of 1247 Prospect Place received official buyout offers within hours of Tyson's announcement. The paperwork was generous, legal, and came with moving assistance. That would have them relocated within 48 hours. Most signed immediately, grateful for an escape from their nightmare. As evening approached, Tyson's phone rang with the call he'd been expecting. Tommy Benedetto's voice carried the smug satisfaction of a man who believed he had broken an unbreakable opponent. Smart move, champ, Tommy said. Takes a big man to admit when he's outclassed. Tell you what, Since you're being so reasonable, maybe we can have a sit-down. Clear the air. Make sure there are no hard feelings." Tyson forced defeat into his voice. "I just want this to be over. Those people have suffered enough because of my mistakes. Tomorrow night, Sunset Park Warehouse on 39th Street. Come alone, and we'll discuss how a legend can retire with dignity." The line went dead, leaving Tyson staring at his phone and understanding that he had just accepted an invitation to what Tommy Benedetto intended to be his execution. But sometimes the greatest victories required walking directly into the enemy's trap. The unmarked FBI van parked 3 blocks from the Sunset Park Warehouse felt like a confessional booth where Mike Tyson was preparing to absolve himself of sins that weren't entirely his own. Detective Santos sat across from him, while FBI agent Patricia Valdez tested recording equipment that would either expose a criminal conspiracy or document the former champion's final moments. "The wire is virtually undetectable," Valdez explained, taping the tiny microphone beneath Tyson's shirt. "Digital transmission with backup recording. Even if they find the transmitter, we'll have everything up to that point." Santos spread intelligence photos across the van's small table, surveillance images of the warehouse, floor plans obtained through official channels, and dossiers on every player in Tommy Benedetto's organization. "The building belongs to Meridian Development Corporation," she said. "Direct connection to the conspiracy. If we can get them talking about their methods, we'll have enough to bring down the entire operation," Valdez finished. "RICO charges, conspiracy, criminal enterprise. Everyone from street muscle to city councilman." Tyson studied the warehouse layout with the same intensity he'd once reserved for opponent footage. Loading docks, multiple entrances, high windows that could conceal sniper positions. Tommy wasn't Benedetto clearly intended this meeting to be more than negotiation. He wanted to make an example that would discourage future interference. "Intelligence suggests they're planning something beyond humiliation," Santos warned. "Tommy's brought in outside muscle, professional contractors who specialize in making problems disappear permanently. This could be an execution disguised as a business meeting." Valdez attached the backup recorder to Tyson's belt, hidden beneath his jacket. "We'll have teams positioned around the perimeter, but if things go bad quickly, we might not reach you in time. Are you sure about this?" Tyson thought about Walter Kowalski lying in a hospital bed, about Carol O'Brien's destroyed home, about elderly veterans forced to flee their sanctuary because criminals viewed their vulnerability as opportunity. Some fights couldn't be won with strategy or superior position. Sometimes victory required walking directly into hell and trusting that righteousness would provide the strength needed to walk back out. "I'm sure," he said, accepting the body. Armor that felt heavier than any championship belt he'd ever worn. These people hurt American heroes. They terrorized elderly veterans who had already given everything for their country. If this is what it takes to stop them, Santos grabbed his arm as he moved toward the van door. "Mike, if you get in there, and it feels wrong, if anything seems off, you abort immediately. We can find another way." "There is no other way," Tyson replied, stepping into the Brooklyn evening that might be his last. Sometimes the only choice is to stand up and fight, regardless of the odds. The warehouse loomed against the sunset like a monument to industrial decay, its broken windows reflecting dying light while shadows gathered in corners that could hide a dozen armed men. Tommy Benedetto was waiting inside with an invitation to violence that he expected Mike Tyson to accept with the naive heroism that had gotten him into this situation. But the man walking toward that warehouse wasn't the same fighter who had intervened on a city bus. This was Iron Mike Tyson evolved, still carrying devastating power in his fists, but now armed with something infinitely more dangerous: a plan. The Sunset Park Warehouse at 8 p.m. resembled a stage set designed for maximum intimidation. Harsh spotlights created pools of blinding light separated by threatening shadows, while the cavernous space echoed with the footsteps of men who specialized in making problems disappear permanently. Mike Tyson walked through the loading dock entrance. With the measured pace of someone accepting inevitable defeat, his shoulders slumped in apparent resignation. The recording equipment beneath his jacket captured every sound: the scrape of his shoes against concrete, the distant murmur of voices, the metallic click of weapons being checked and positioned. "Iron Mike fucking Tyson," Tommy Benedetto announced. from a makeshift throne constructed from shipping pallets. At 48, he wore his criminality like expensive cologne, his tailored suit and gold jewelry marking him as someone who had transformed street violence into corporate profit. The man who thought he could save some old soldiers. 24 of Tommy's crew filled the warehouse space, their positions carefully chosen to create crossfire zones and eliminate escape routes. Professional contractors mixed with street muscle, creating a combination of experience and brutality that had served Tommy's organization well in previous negotiations. But the real power players stood beside Tommy's throne like courtiers attending a medieval king. City Councilman Richard Hartley shifted nervously in his politician's suit, clearly uncomfortable with the warehouse setting, but unable to absent himself from what he believed would be the final resolution of a profitable problem. Marcus Webb, president of Meridian Development Corporation, consulted his phone with the detached professionalism of someone reviewing quarterly earnings reports. The gentrification scheme that had terrorized Brooklyn's veterans was, to him, merely another successful business venture requiring tidying up of loose ends. "You got balls showing up here," Tommy continued, circling Tyson like a predator studying wounded prey. "After all the trouble you caused, all the money you cost us, you still think you can negotiate?" The recording equipment captured every word, as Tommy detailed the entire conspiracy for Tyson's benefit and his own ego. The scheme had displaced hundreds of elderly residents across Brooklyn, generating over $30 million in development profits through systematic intimidation backed by organized crime muscle. "Your veteran friends were just collateral damage," Webb added, his corporate coldness more chilling than Tommy's street brutality. "Market forces require occasional disruption of existing housing patterns to achieve optimal development potential." Councilman Hartley found his voice, though it trembled with nervous energy. "The city's position has always been that voluntary relocation serves everyone's best interests. We never intended for anyone to be hurt." Tommy laughed, the sound echoing through the warehouse like breaking glass. "Hurt? Old man, we barely got started. That fire was just a warning. You want to see what happens when people don't take hints." He gestured toward a baseball bat propped against the shipping pallets, its handle stained with what could only be Walter Kowalski's blood. "Time for your final lesson in respecting your betters, champ." Tommy Benedetto's first swing with the bloodstained baseball bat carried all the vicious confidence of a man who believed Mike Tyson had been broken by watching his friends suffer. The weapon whistled through air where the former champion's head had been a split second earlier, connecting with nothing but empty space and shattered expectations. That Tyson's slip was minimal, economical, devastating in its simplicity. Decades of muscle memory guided him away from the crude attack, while his right hand traveled the same 8-inch path that had destroyed Vincent Torino on the bus, carrying the accumulated rage of watching America's heroes terrorized by cowards who preyed on the vulnerable. The uppercut lifted Tommy off his feet and sent him crashing into the shipping pallets with bone-crushing finality. The bat clattered across concrete as its wielder joined Vincent in the growing ranks of criminals who had learned too late that legends don't fade, they evolve. FBI, federal agents. The warehouse doors exploded inward as Agent Valdez led a 20-person tactical team through multiple entry points, their tactical lights cutting through the staged darkness like righteous swords. Everyone on the ground. Now, chaos erupted as Tommy's crew realized their carefully planned execution had become their own capture. Some surrendered immediately, dropping weapons and raising hands as federal agents swarmed their positions. Others chose fight over flight, their street experience proving inadequate against professional law enforcement training. Councilman Hartley dove behind shipping containers, his political instincts finally recognizing the gravity of his situation. Federal conspiracy charges carried sentences that would end his career and his freedom, transforming a corrupt politician into just another white-collar criminal serving hard time. Marcus Webb attempted to destroy evidence on his phone, frantically, deleting files that documented the illegal coordination between his development company and organized crime enforcement. Agent Valdez tackled him before he could complete the destruction, securing devices that contained months of incriminating communications. But Tommy Benedetto wasn't finished. Blood streaming from his mouth, jaw clearly broken, he pulled a knife. from his jacket with the desperate fury of someone who understood that capture meant life imprisonment. The blade gleamed under warehouse lights as he lunged toward Tyson with the wild aggression of absolute desperation. Tyson's response showcased not just legendary power, but the tactical intelligence developed over decades of evolution from street fighter to strategic warrior. He caught Tommy's knife hand at the wrist, applied leverage that snapped bone with audible precision, then delivered a combination that would have impressed Cus D'Amato with its technical perfection. Left hook to the body, right uppercut to the solar plexus, finishing left hook that sent Tommy Benedetto to the concrete floor with permanent understanding of why some legends never lose their edge. Target secure, Agent Valdez announced into her radio as Tommy joined his crew in zip-tie restraints. All subjects in custody, evidence intact. The recording equipment had captured everything. Detailed confessions of criminal conspiracy, admissions of violence against elderly veterans, direct connections between street crime and political corruption. In 45 minutes, Tyson had accomplished what months of investigation couldn't achieve. Complete documentation of a criminal enterprise that had terrorized Brooklyn's most vulnerable residents, standing in the warehouse that had been designed as his tomb. Mike Tyson watched federal agents arrest the men who had hurt his friends. Knowing that sometimes justice required more than good intentions, it demanded the courage to walk into hell and emerge carrying evidence that would destroy evil forever. Dawn broke over Brooklyn with the surreal quality of justice finally served. Federal agents processing evidence while news crews transformed the Sunset Park warehouse into the epicenter of New York's biggest organized crime bust in decades. Mike Tyson stood beside Agent Valdez, watching as 23 defendants were loaded into transport vehicles that would carry them toward federal prosecutions and lengthy prison sentences. Conspiracy, racketeering, elder abuse, arson, assault with deadly weapons, Valdez recited, consulting her preliminary arrest report. The recordings you obtain provide ironclad evidence against everyone from street muscle to city council. We're looking at sentences ranging from 15 years to life. Tommy Benedetto, his jaw wired shut and his criminal empire dismantled, glared at Tyson from the back of a federal transport van with the impotent rage of someone who had finally encountered an opponent he couldn't intimidate or destroy. City Councilman Hartley sat beside him in handcuffs, his political career reduced to evidence Exhibit A in a federal corruption case. Detective Santos arrived with news that transformed victory into something approaching resurrection. Emergency. Housing assistance has been approved for all displaced veterans, she announced, her professional satisfaction evident despite exhaustion from an all-night operation. Cities providing temporary accommodation while 1247 Prospect Place undergoes complete restoration. The building itself would become a symbol of community resilience rather than criminal success. Multiple contractors had volunteered for restoration work, while veterans organizations across the country had donated funds for security improvements and accessibility modifications. What Tommy Benedetto had intended to destroy would emerge stronger than ever. Marcus Webb's arrest had triggered federal seizure of Meridian Development Corporation assets, including millions of dollars in illegal profits that would be redirected toward affordable housing initiatives for veterans and elderly residents. The gentrification scheme that had terrorized Brooklyn's most vulnerable would fund their protection and support. Walter's awake, Eleanor Kowalski reported via phone call to Santos, who immediately relayed the information to Tyson. Doctors say he's stable enough for visitors. Keeps asking if you kept your promise. Carol O'Brien emerged from the Red Cross shelter that morning to find donations and job offers from construction companies, mechanical firms, and veteran advocacy organizations. Her lifetime of skills and leadership had been recognized by people who understood that heroes come in many forms, not all of them famous. Danny Martinez, recovering in VA psychiatric care, received visits from fellow veterans who shared stories of Mike Tyson's stand for their community. The psychological support network that had fractured under criminal pressure was rebuilding stronger than before, anchored by understanding that someone had finally fought back successfully. Brooklyn District Attorney's Office is reviewing every case involving Urban Renewal Solutions and associated companies, Santos continued. We're looking at potential criminal charges in dozens of additional harassment cases across the borough. The media narrative had shifted completely. Headlines that had criticized Tyson's withdrawal now praised his strategic thinking. Iron Mike's tactical genius destroys criminal empire, replaced previous condemnation. Social media exploded with admiration for a plan that had required the former champion to accept public humiliation in service of justice, standing outside the warehouse where he had risked everything to protect people who had already sacrificed everything for their country. Mike Tyson felt something he hadn't experienced since his championship years, the deep satisfaction of victory earned through strategy, courage, and absolute commitment to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The greatest fight of his life was over, and the good guys had won decisively. 3 months later, Mike Tyson rode the same B-46 bus route where this extraordinary journey had begun, but everything had changed in ways that restored faith in justice and the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary outcomes. The gentrification scheme that had terrorized Brooklyn's veterans had been dismantled so completely that urban renewal solutions had become a cautionary tale taught in law enforcement academies. His destination was 1247 Prospect Place, but the building he approached bore little resemblance to the war-torn structure he had defended against criminal predators. Complete renovation had transformed the pre-war building into a model of accessible housing for elderly veterans, featuring state-of-the-art security systems, medical support facilities, and common areas designed for community gathering. A bronze plaque beside the main entrance read, Mike Tyson Community Center for Veterans, though the former champion had initially resisted the honor. Walter Kowalski had insisted, arguing that heroes should be remembered not just for their victories, but for their willingness to risk everything protecting others. Right on time, Walter called from the building's renovated lobby, his recovery complete and his military bearing restored to full dignity. The prosthetic leg that had once marked him as vulnerable now seemed like a badge of honor, evidence of service and sacrifice that commanded respect from everyone who encountered his story. Eleanor stood beside her husband, her smile free from the fear and worry that had haunted her during the darkest days of their ordeal. He's been waiting by the window for 20 minutes, she confided to Tyson. Like a child on Christmas morning. Carol O'Brien emerged from her new ground-floor apartment wearing mechanics coveralls that bore the logo of Brooklyn Veterans Construction Cooperative, the nonprofit organization she now managed with funding from seized criminal assets. Her destroyed possessions had been replaced by community donations, but more importantly, her role as building superintendent had evolved into community leadership that inspired veterans across the city. Got 17 new residents moving in next month, she reported with characteristic efficiency. All veterans, all pre-approved for support services. Waiting list is approaching 100 names. The building's transformation extended beyond physical renovation. Danny Martinez had returned from psychiatric treatment to find his apartment converted into a communication center where he coordinated support services for veteran residents throughout Brooklyn. His grandson Michael had relocated his construction business to the building's ground floor, creating employment opportunities for other veterans while maintaining family proximity. Frank Romano, who had tearfully packed his belongings months earlier, now served as building security coordinator and volunteer fire safety instructor. His granddaughter played safely in the courtyard where Tommy Benedetto's crew had once conducted surveillance, her laughter mixing with the voices of children whose veteran grandparents no longer lived in fear. The real victory, Walter said, as they walked through halls that had once echoed with threats and broken dreams, is that we're not just surviving anymore. We're thriving, building community, teaching the next generation that standing up for what's right actually works. The tour concluded in the renovated courtyard where a memorial garden honored veterans who had died before seeing justice served. Tommy Benedetto was serving 25 years in federal prison. Councilman Hartley had been expelled from office and sentenced to 15 years for corruption. The entire criminal enterprise had been dismantled so thoroughly that similar schemes across the country had been abandoned by criminals who understood the consequences of targeting America's heroes. As evening approached and Tyson prepared to return to his own life, Walter presented him with a final gift, a key to apartment 1A, the building's basement unit that had been converted into a private space for the champion who had saved their community. In case you ever need a place to call home, Walter said. Heroes are always welcome here. Standing in the courtyard where children played under the protection of grateful grandparents, Mike Tyson understood that he had found something more valuable than any championship belt. A family of warriors who had taught him that true strength came not from destroying opponents, but from protecting the people who mattered most. The legend of Iron Mike had evolved into something infinitely more powerful. The story of a champion who proved that heroes never truly retire, they just find new ways to serve. If you like the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.